In 1984, in Paris, a jury sat down to hand out the top prize at a festival of fantasy and science fiction. The president of that jury was Alejandro Jodorowsky, the man who made El Topo, a cult figure, the kind of director other directors talk about in hushed voices. And the film they gave the grand prize to was about mutants on an island. A gory little thing, severed heads, a mad scientist, a man on a motorbike trying to kill the people who turned him into a monster. Blood by the bucket. It was made for almost no money by a young director nobody outside his own country had heard of. And that country was New Zealand. And the film was called Death Warmed Up. And here is the part that should stop you. It came out 3 years before Bad Taste. 3 years before the film everyone points to. 3 years before the story we all tell ourselves about New Zealand horror. The one that starts with a skinny kid from Pukerua Bay and a homemade camera and a beach full of aliens. New Zealand was winning prizes for splatter in Paris before that story is supposed to have started. So tonight, the obvious question: if the story does not start with Jackson, where does it start? And what was here before him? And why does almost nobody talk about it? My name is Matt Dolby, and this is Strange Country. Tonight, the country before the rupture, life before Jackson. So, to understand New Zealand horror, you have to understand something almost absurd first. For most of the 20th century, New Zealand barely made films at all. Not bad films, not a few films, almost none. Here is the number that tells you everything. Between 1939 and 1972, a span of 33 years, New Zealand made, are you ready for this? 5 fiction feature films. 5. And every one of them was directed by one of 2 men, John O'Shea or Ruddell Hayward. That was the entire national cinema. 2 blokes and a third of a century. There was a national film unit set up in 1941 on the advice of a visiting British documentary maker, but it made what governments make: newsreels, travel shorts, footage of dignitaries cutting ribbons, films that told New Zealand it was tidy and decent and getting on nicely. Nobody was making films that told New Zealand the truth about itself. Just think about what that means. A whole country, a few million people, almost none of them ever seeing their own streets on screen, never hearing their own accent come out of a cinema speaker. The films came from Hollywood and from England. New Zealand watched everyone else's stories and told almost none of its own. There's a phrase for what was going on: the cultural cringe. The quiet assumption drummed into a small country at the bottom of the world that the real stories happened somewhere else. That your own life was too small, too provincial, too embarrassing to put on a screen. Why film a main street in Taranaki when you could watch New York? For decades, New Zealand believed that about itself. And a country that will not look at itself in the mirror is a country with a lot stored up in the dark. And then, in 1977, something cracked open. A man named Roger Donaldson made a film called Sleeping Dogs. It was a dark political thriller about a man trying to stay out of a fight as the country slides into a kind of soft fascism. It starred a young actor making his name, a fellow called Sam Neill. Sleeping Dogs mattered for a reason that has nothing to do with the plot. It was the first full-length 35mm feature film made entirely by a New Zealand crew. The first time the country made a proper film, start to finish, by itself. And more than 250,000 New Zealanders went and watched it. And that number terrified the right people. Politicians who had spent decades assuming nobody would pay to see a local film suddenly had proof they were wrong. And in 1978, Parliament set up the New Zealand Film Commission. Public money to make films with real New Zealand content. The lights came on. After 36 years of dark, the country would finally make things. Now, here's the cruel timing. The man who should have been first in the queue never got to stand in it. His name was Ronald Hugh Morrison. He lived his whole life in Hawera, a small town in Taranaki, in the shadow of the mountain. He drank too much and he wrote like nobody else in the country. Dark, funny gothic novels about small town New Zealand and the rot underneath it. Sex and murder and hypocrisy behind the net curtains. He is today regarded as the king of New Zealand Gothic. Back then, almost nobody read him. In early 1972, Morrison said something to a fellow novelist that turned out to be unbearably accurate. He said, and I am quoting him, "I hope I'm not another one of those poor buggers who gets discovered when they're dead." He died later that year, in obscurity, in Hawera. And then, of course, they discovered him. Now I want you to just hold that thought, because the first real New Zealand horror film, when it finally came straight out of one of Morrison's books. He just did not live to see it. So this is the country before Jackson, newly able to make films, carrying a gothic streak it had mostly kept on a page, and, as Sam Neill would later put it, soaked in a particular national mood. In 1995, Neill made a documentary about New Zealand cinema. He called it Cinema of Unease, and the phrase stuck because he was right. He argued that the country's films were dark and brooding and uneasy because the country was. A small place at the bottom of the world, still working out who it was, telling stories about dysfunctional families and damaged children and, in his words, the occasional patricide. And you can stand the geography next to the films and watch them rhyme. New Zealand is two long, thin islands in the bottom corner of the map, 1,000 miles of cold ocean from anywhere. The next stop is Antarctica. The light is hard and the bush is old and close. And the quiet out there is a physical thing. It is one of the most beautiful places on earth, and one of the most isolated. And a certain kind of New Zealander feels both at once. Beauty and loneliness, arriving from the same direction. That feeling is the engine room of the whole national horror tradition. Sam Neill just gave it a name. And that unease was already there in 1980. It just needed somewhere to go. And it went to horror. Here's a fun problem. Ask what the first New Zealand horror film was, and you get 3 different answers. All 3 are defensible, and all 3 come with an asterisk. Start with the strangest one. In 1981, a horror film was shot in Auckland. Streets, houses, a university campus, all of it in New Zealand. The film was called Strange Behaviour, and by the logic of where the camera physically stood, it has a fair claim to be the first horror film made in the country. Except it's set in Illinois. The whole thing pretends to be small-town America. The director was American, a man named Michael Lachlan. He co-wrote it with Bill Condon, who later won an Oscar. The plot is pure American drive-in. Teenagers being murdered while a university runs secret mind control experiments on the local kids. There is even a synth score by Tangerine Dream. So yes, the first horror film shot in New Zealand is a film doing everything it can to convince you it's not in New Zealand. Now, just sit with that for a moment, because it's the whole problem in one movie. The country could now make films, but the instinct, even in horror, was to point the camera at someone else's main street, to borrow America, to hide. The second answer is better, and it is the one that comes straight out of Ronald Hugh Morrison. In 1982, Sam Pillsbury made a film of Morrison's first novel, The Scarecrow. The book had been published back in 1963 in Sydney because nobody at home would touch it, and it opens on what was once the most famous line in New Zealand writing. The same week our fowls were stolen, Daphne Moran had her throat cut. The film keeps that. It is set in a small New Zealand town in the early 50s. 2 boys, some stolen chickens, and a killer moving through the town murdering girls. And into this comes a stranger. A travelling magician and hypnotist named Hubert Salter, played by the old Hollywood horror veteran John Carradine. All bones and menace, living at the Undertaker's. The Scarecrow is gothic more than it is gory. It is about the clean, church-going net-curtained surface of a small New Zealand town, and the rot sitting directly underneath it. The respectable family with the drunk uncle, the quiet street with a killer on it. That was Morrison's whole subject. The town that knows and says nothing. He had been writing it for years when the country ignored him, and now it was finally up on a screen. And it did something no New Zealand film had done before. It got into Cannes Film Festival. The first New Zealand film ever officially selected there, in the director's fortnight. Other Kiwi films had been shopped around the Cannes sale market. This was the first one the festival itself picked. So, the country's first horror film to actually travel, to stand on a world stage, was built from the words of a man who died convinced no one would ever read him. There's his second answer. The first New Zealand horror with a New Zealand soul. But if you want the real thing, the film that does what we mean when we say horror, blood and mutants and a body count, you want the third answer. You want Death Warmed Up. And to understand Death Warmed Up, you have to understand the man who made it. David Blythe did not arrive as a horror director. He arrived as a provocateur. His very first film back in 1978 was called Angel Mine, and it was the first film New Zealand's Interim Film Commission ever funded, that turned into the Film Commission proper later that same year. A punk, do-it-yourself, deliberately shocking film about sex and consumerism in the suburbs made for next to nothing. It caused a scandal. Morals campaigners were appalled that public money had paid for it. The censor gave it an R18 and added a line to the certificate that I promise I am not inventing. And I would love to have it on a t-shirt. It read, "Contains punk cult material." So, by the time Blythe turned to splatter, He already knew exactly how to get under a country's skin. He had done it on his first go. 6 years later, in 1984, he made Death Warmed Up, the film that opened tonight's episode, the one that won in Paris. This is New Zealand's first proper splatter film. A young man, played by Michael Hurst in his screen debut, is brainwashed by a mad surgeon into killing his own parents. Years later, he goes back to the island clinic where it happened to take his revenge, and the place is now full of the surgeon's experiments. Mutants. One of them played by Bruno Lawrence, who you should remember because he comes back later in this episode. NZ On Screen, the country's own film archive, calls Death Warmed Up New Zealand's first horror movie. It also calls it the first horror the Film Commission ever funded, and it points out something lovely. It was the first New Zealand film to use a Steadicam, that smooth floating camera rig. Now, think about who else in New Zealand in the 80s was obsessed with making a camera do impossible things on no money. You're right. The kid up the coast building his own Steadicam out of scrap to make a film called Bad Taste. David Blythe got there first. 3 years first. Death Warmed Up is the missing link. The film that proves the Jackson instinct. Gore as comedy, splatter as craft, doing more with less, was already in the New Zealand water before Jackson bottled it. And it was not alone. In 1985, Gayleen Preston made a ghost story called Mr. Wrong. A woman buys a used Jaguar. The car is haunted by its previous owner, a woman who vanished, blood found on the seats, body never recovered. It is a quite genuinely unsettling film about a woman being followed by a man and by a ghost, and not being believed about either. It matters for a second reason too. Mr. Wrong was the first New Zealand film of any kind made with both a female producer and a female director. In a genre that spent the decade watching women get murdered, here was a horror film made by women about a woman that took her fear seriously. That same year, 1985, Jeff Murphy made The Quiet Earth. A scientist wakes up one morning and every other human being on Earth has gone. Just gone. He is, as far as he can tell, the last man alive. He drives through empty streets. He stands in empty houses. He starts, slowly, to come apart. It is one of the great films about loneliness ever made anywhere, and it is built on the most New Zealand feeling there is, being the last people at the bottom of the world, with the lights going out. The film understood something before almost anyone else did, that the real horror at the end of the world is not the dying, it is the quiet afterwards, the empty street, the breakfast for one, no one left to tell. The man at the centre of it is played by Bruno Lawrence, the mutant from Death Warmed Up, now carrying an entire apocalypse on his face. And then there is the one that actually frightened people, not in cinemas, in their living rooms. In 1981, New Zealand television made a children's series called Under the Mountain, from the novel by Maurice G. Two red-headed twins, Rachel and Theo, discover that under the city of Auckland lived the Wilberforces. Things that look like a quiet suburban family and are actually enormous slugs wearing human skin, waiting to end the world. And if you don't believe me, find a New Zealander who was a child in around 1981 and ask them about the Wilberforces. Watch their face change. That show got into a generation and stayed there. So here is where Chapter 2 leaves us. By 1985, before Jackson had released a frame, New Zealand has a splatter film that won in Paris, a gothic film that played Cannes, a feminist ghost story, and an apocalyptic masterpiece. Oh, and the kids' show that traumatized the nation. The country had horror. It had plenty of it. It just had a hole in it. A big one. And we need to talk about what was missing. I want to slow right down for this part, because it matters more than anything else in this episode, and it is not mine to rush. New Zealand sits on top of one of the deepest, oldest, most powerful bodies of supernatural storytelling anywhere on Earth. It was here for centuries before a single camera arrived, and almost none of it reached the screen. I am talking about Maori cosmology, and I need to be honest about where I am standing. I am Pākehā. I am speaking from the outside, so I am going to move carefully here. Name only what the culture's own sources name, and not pretend for 1 second that these films drew on any of it. They did not. That absence is the whole point of this chapter, and it is the only part of this story that is mine to tell. The fuller story, Maori screen culture and the Maori supernatural told from the inside, is something we are working towards as a proper episode on its own, made in collaboration with Maori filmmakers and Maori voices, with the people these stories belong to. This is not that episode, and I would not try to make it on my own. This is just me, carefully and with respect, pointing at a hole in the Pākehā films and asking why it is there. So, gently, here is a little of what was sitting right there in the culture, described the way Te Ara, the country's own encyclopedia, describes it. There are taniwha, supernatural beings that live in deep water. Lakes, rivers, the sea. They live in lairs, places people knew to leave alone. In some traditions, they are called kaitiaki, guardians and protectors of a tribe. In others, they are creatures that take people, but they are not a monster of the week. They are a part of how a place is understood, and for many people, they are a living presence still. There is mukutu, sorcery, harm worked on a person. There is tapu, the sacred and the restricted, people, places, and things so charged that to mishandle them is to invite real harm. Not a superstition, closer to a law. Now, I could stand here as a horror writer and tell you that is the most extraordinary material a storyteller could ever ask for. And on one level, it plainly is. But that instinct, the one that looks at someone else's sacred world and sees content to use, is exactly the instinct this chapter is wary of. This was never a prop box for a settler film industry to raid for scares. It is alive. It belongs to people. And a great deal of it is tapu, which means it is not there for the taking at all. So maybe it is no surprise the early films left it alone. What tells you something is what they reached for instead. Strange Behaviour pretends to be in Illinois. The Scarecrow was a Pākehā small town. Death Warmed Up was mutants and mad science. Mr. Wrong was a haunted European car. The horror these films reached for was imported, or it was the dread of the Pākehā town, the empty Pākehā road. There is one film from this period that even lets a Maori character into the story properly: The Quiet Earth. And spoiler alert, if you've not seen the film, just fast forward 30 seconds. When the last man alive finally finds other survivors, one of the three is Api, a Maori man. 3 people left in the entire world, and the film makes sure one of them is Maori. For its time, that is something. But notice what it is. It is a Maori character in a Pākehā man's film, written and directed by Pākehā. A seat at the table? Not the table. So why the silence? Part of it is simple and ugly. The film industry that switched on in 1978 was almost entirely Pākehā. The money, the cameras, the training, the decisions, all of it. And you cannot tell a culture's deepest stories from the outside. You should not. Some of that material is tapu. Some of it, all of it, is not yours to sell, to scare. And think about what it costs a country to import its monsters. When your scary films are set in Illinois, or built around a haunted European car, or borrowed wholesale from American drive-in cinema, you are telling on yourself. You are saying the frightening thing is always somewhere else, always foreign. Meanwhile, the oldest and most powerful stories in the country, the Taniwha, in the deep water down the road that people drive past every day, never reach the screen at all. That's not just a gap in a film industry. That is a country still quietly working out whose stories count. But here's the thing about a silence. Eventually, someone fills it. In 1987, a film called Ngati was released. It was directed by Barry Barclay, written by Tama Puata. It is a gentle drama set in a small coastal town in 1948. No monsters, no blood. And it was the first feature film in the history of New Zealand written and directed by Mauri. The first time the country's original people told a feature-length story on screen on their own terms. 1987. Look at that year, because it is the same year as Bad Taste. The year the skinny kid from Pukerua Bay finally splattered his way onto the world stage is the exact same year that a Maori cinema, as a thing made by Maori, begins. 2 ruptures at once. The country grew up twice in the same 12 months. And 1 year later, in 1988, Merata Mita made Mauri. She became the first Maori woman and the first woman in New Zealand of any background to write and direct a dramatic feature on her own. For more than 30 years afterward, she remained the only Maori woman to have done it. So, the supernatural that the Pākehā horror films would not touch, could not touch, did not have the right to touch, did not stay buried. It waited. It waited for Māori filmmakers to pick up the cameras and decide for themselves what gets told and how and by whom. The silence under the mountain was never empty. It was holding its breath, waiting for the right people to break it. And when Strange Country comes back to this properly, it will be with those people, not about them. So, life before Jackson. It turns out the lights were already on. New Zealand had spent the early 80s quietly proving it could frighten people. A splatter film good enough for a jury in Paris. A gothic film good enough for Cannes, pulled from the pages of a man who died sure it would never be read. A ghost story made by women, an apocalypse carried on Bruno Lawrence's face, and slug monsters in the suburbs that a whole generation still flinches at. When bad taste arrives, the rupture lands hard. But it lands hard because the ground was already there to break. Jackson did not invent New Zealand horror. He detonated something that had been built, film by film, by people whose names we have mostly forgotten. David Blythe, Sam Pillsbury, Gayleen Preston, Jeff Murphy, Ronald Hugh Morrison, who supplied the words and died before he saw a frame. Maurice G., who put slug monsters under Auckland and into a generation of nightmares. And here is the small, perfect irony to leave you with. That film commission, the one set up in 1978 to make respectable, properly New Zealand films, it funded David Blythe's Mutants. And a few years later, it handed nearly $250,000 to a skinny kid from Pukerewa Bay shooting aliens on the weekends for 4 years. The institution built to make the country look serious is the same one that paid for the splatter. New Zealand horror was, in the end, an inside job. And in 1987 turns out to be the hinge of the whole story. Not just because of Jackson, because the same year Barry Barclay opened a door that should have been open from the start, and the deepest and most important cultural traditions in the country finally got a hand on the camera. Now, go back to that jury in Paris, back in 1984. They thought they were giving a prize to a gory little film from the far side of the world. What they were actually doing was putting a flag in the ground. Proof, 3 years early, that the strangest country was already making the strange. Jackson gets the statue, but he was never the start. He was the rupture. And now you know what ruptured. Next time we leave New Zealand and cross the Tasman, and we go back further than any film we have talked about tonight, to 1900, to a girls' college, a picnic on St. Valentine's Day, and a volcanic rock that has been standing there for more than 6 million years. 3 schoolgirls and a teacher walk up Hanging Rock. They do not come back. And the film never tells you why. Peter Weir's picnic at Hanging Rock is not horror in the way Death Warmed Up is. There is no blood. There is no monster. There is just a question with no answer, and a country quietly losing its mind trying to find one. That is the headwater of Australian dread. That is the next one. One more thing before you go, and it's a big one for us. Next Thursday, the 25th of June, we are launching something new. It is called Late Fees. Every second Thursday in between the main episodes, I'm going to sit down and talk about what is new and what is worth digging back out. New releases, lost classics, the good, the cheap and the unhinged. Australian and New Zealand horror first, always. And we could not have picked up a better film to start with. Late Fees number 1 is Wake in Fright. Ted Kotcheff's 1971 nightmare in the outback. The yabba, the heat, the beer, Donald Pleasance, and a kangaroo hunt that still makes people walk out of the room. It is one of the most important films either of our countries has ever made, and Umbrella have just put out a brand new 4K restoration that looks extraordinary. So that's Late Fees, starting Thursday the 25th. And every film I talk about you can find in the video vault at strangecountry.com.au, with somewhere to watch it. A new episode every Thursday from now on. The main show one week, late fees the next. I'm Matt Dolby, and this has been Strange Country. Pass me a pineapple chunk.